Good morning and a warm welcome to this ICAS webinar, Essential National Minimum Wage Knowledge. I'm Justine Ricomany and I head up the Employment and Devolved Taxes side of things here at ICAS. Our event this morning will last for 1 hour, covering the information on the hot topics of the moment on all things national living and minimum wage. Before we begin, though, just a few housekeeping matters to remind you of. You can submit questions at any time through the Q&A facility, which can be accessed at the top of your screen. Questions can be submitted anonymously. We will be saving all your questions until the end of the webinar, for the live Q&A section. So please also join the conversation today through the chat box, which is accessed at the top of your screen. This allows you to comment on or discuss with fellow attendees matters covered by this webinar. We're recording this webinar and we will make it available for on-demand viewing afterwards in case you want to refer back to it. The slides will be available on the events page on the ICAS website under the events listing. Everyone on the webinar is automatically muted, so there is no need to be concerned about background noise wherever you are. We'll be carrying out a poll at the end of the webinar as well to gauge audience satisfaction, so please make sure you take part. So we look forward to receiving your questions throughout the course of the webinar, and of course we will try to get to as many as possible. Whatever questions we don't manage to answer in the Q&A, we'll pop on a spreadsheet with the webinar recording and the slides. So this morning I am delighted to be joined by Jeni Morris from EY. Jeni is an ex-HMRC National Minimum Wage Compliance Officer and is now recognised as the UK's foremost expert on all matters relating to the national minimum wage, with unique insights and knowledge. Jeni passionately supports businesses to mitigate the financial and reputational impact of ongoing or pending HMRC NMW investigations. So today we're welcoming Jeni to come and speak to us about what's going on in her world. Over to you, Jeni.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Justine. Very nice. And very nice to be able to chat to you all this morning as well. Let me just slip through the first couple of slides here. Where we're going to start off with national minimum wage, it's an ever-changing landscape, but things that do remain static are how they actually enforce NMW. So HMRC enforce the national minimum wage and living wage requirements. They're split into two different groups within HMRC's minimum wage team. They do the proactive enforcement and they do the reactive enforcement. The reactive enforcement is driven by those complaints. So worker complaints, they can be anonymous, they go via the ICAS helpline, or there is an online form that you can actually complete. So they're making it very easy for workers to actually report any areas where they think NMW is not being paid correctly. The other part of HMRC's enforcement team is the proactive team, the targeted enforcement team, the special compliance officers who, after risk profiling, you get a letter landing on the employer's desk going, we're going to do a national minimum wage investigation into your business. Now, I don't know how many of you have been involved in these investigations previously. The workforce within HMRC is growing all the time. I think it's currently sits about 400 and odd officers, but there's lots of risk profiling going on in the background that we're seeing with these. Anyone that has been involved in an NMW investigation, they can be quite lengthy, quite tiresome, and quite administrative to actually get through. Some of the larger employers happily can go on for 3, 4, even 5 years. I've known them for. Other investigations can be closed off quite swiftly. And when I say swiftly, it could be within the 9 to 12 month category. Why does it take so long for an investigation? It's because it goes back over a total of 6 years. So they'll look at all of the current and former workers in a 6-year period. So obviously certain data from there can get really quite tricky, especially if you've changed payroll providers, different things during the 6-year period. Maybe you don't have some of the information required. I mean, it is just pay, hours and deductions, but actually when you delve into them, it becomes quite complex. HMRC leadership has changed over the last few years. And I think historically, if you think about national minimum wage enforcement, it was normally sector targeted. They look at retail, hospitality, and those who are paying closer to the NMW rates. However, last year they started a new different type of campaigns to look at. So rather than do it as a sector focus, they started doing it under a geographical focus. And it's had quite a lot of impact. I think they started last December 22 was the first one that actually went out. And that was in Belfast. And what they do under a geographical approach now is they'll send, in Belfast case, I think they sent about 3,000 letters out to businesses in the Belfast area. 3 weeks later, and it is a strict timeline that they follow with this geographical approach, 3 weeks later, they sent out another letter to those employers, nudging them, saying, did you get the original letter? Would you like a little health check by HMRC? Do you need any help to look at this? At that point, they also flooded the market by writing to workers who, according to their internal HMRC systems, work within that geographical region. And they sent out 30,000 correspondence to workers, basically saying to workers, these are common areas of NMW risk. If you've got any concerns, here's the direction to our helpline. And they directed them over to there. They've replicated the Belfast. They've gone through a number of different regions so far. We've got Glasgow, we've got Cardiff, we've got Birmingham. And I think the geographical approach is one that they will continue, because I think it's been quite successful for them. Alongside with the geographical approach, HMRC are also undertaking a revisit campaign. And that obviously, as it says on the tin, they are going back to previous investigations which are closed, ones that aren't necessarily were enforced on. Maybe the previous investigation passed with flying colours at the time. But HMRC are revisiting, and we're seeing a significant number of these revisits taking place. With the revisit campaign, it isn't always looking at what they looked at previously. It's looking at things through a different lens. So if we go back to, I don't know, 2017, 2018, where a lot of businesses were in the retail and hospitality, and a lot of the enforcement target around that time was around the workers who were paid closest to NMW rates, probably the time workers, hourly paid workers. What we're finding now is HMRC are looking more to make sure they've followed through the guidance they were given in the previous investigation, but also looking at the wider population, bringing in salaried workers. And I'll probably touch on that a little bit more as we go on with our little chat here.
So, I mean, Jenny, just let me ask you a question while we're on this, still on this slide, I guess. These geographical campaigns seem to be like a bit of a pincer movement on employers, and the revisit campaigns are obviously, you know, did you do what we told you to do last time, and if not, why not, kind of thing. But what in the last 12 months, give us a flavour of how people have got on with those. How have they fared?
Okay, the revisit campaign, employers are normally quite, okay, yeah, well, I'm fine. I was fine last time, come back in. And then 6-12 months into the reviews, they're realising they're widening them. So they're saying, well, you didn't cover that in the last investigation. And that's what HMRC can actually do. They can widen it into every entity within the business, but also looking at different populations. So the salaried population, the middle management, has not normally been in focus, but it is strictly in focus now. And obviously that comes into, do you keep time records? Can you prove that national minimum wage is being paid for those salaried workers? So it's providing a little bit of headache and a challenge for some employers at the moment. The geographical one, I think is reaping benefits for HMRC. They are seeing, because they're going to all different types of employers, they're seeing new sectors and risks occurring that maybe they've not thought of before.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I'm not surprised by that. You know, if they're sort of approaching employers and then approaching all the employees as well, then they're bound to be reaping some benefits from that, aren't they? Talking about kind of naming and shaming. That's what national minimum wage has historically been famous for. But what's happened to that? Because the last thing I saw on the naming and shaming scheme was about 6 months ago or something. So have they stopped it, or what's happening?
No, my understanding is they have not stopped it at all. I think there was a few different elements. Obviously, there was a lot of changes in ministerial roles, etc., that delayed a lot of the naming and shaming. The information I've got is that I would think imminently we will see another naming and shaming list coming to the fore. The issue with the naming and shaming list that came out, as you said, 6 months ago, those were for investigations that closed in 2019. So we're talking 5 years ago. Businesses have moved on since then, but the naming and shaming list is so far behind. Don't know what the intention is of the Department of Business and Trade, if they're going to try and catch up, because obviously there's been a number of different investigations that have closed over the past 5 years. My understanding from the information I've received is they are still adamant that they will be doing naming and shaming. They say it will be regular, and regular should be every quarter, every 3 months. So yeah, I do think there is another one coming shortly for you.
I mean, it seems ridiculously unfair that an investigation can take place in 2019 and people are being named and shamed on the back of that sort of in 2024. I mean, it's completely crazy. You've got that reputational damage hanging over your head for 5 years after the investigation's finished.
Indeed, and many of these employers have actually appealed against the naming, because you do have a right to appeal to. It was Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, and it's now the Department of Business and Trade. You can appeal against it, but invariably employers do not hear about that appeal at all till now, 5 years later, when they're about to be named. So a number of employers are now getting some correspondence to say, we've got your appeal, understand it. It's been unsuccessful. However, within the next, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you will be named. And that's the way HMRC, well, it's not HMRC, it's Department of Business and Trade, are dealing with these appeals at the moment. And talking of appeals, it's very, very few. I can only think of a handful of cases who've been successful with an appeal. It's more like risk to life, security risk, different things like that, as to where the Department of Business and Trade would an accepted appeal against naming. So that's probably one of the reasons why the lists are so long, because nearly everyone that gets an enforcement notice will be put on the named list. Okay.
Great. All right. Thank you.
It's okay. So minimum wage, you think it'd be really easy to get it right. We've been doing this for a while. A lot of people are actually looking at this and going, well, it's just a rate. Why are people getting it wrong? The thing to remember is it isn't just a rate. It's how you actually calculate it that is the most valuable, important part of NMW compliance. And looking at the rates and how you calculate, it starts off with the foundation of what type of worker are you? Because depending on the worker category, you all have a different calculation, what can be included, can't be included, how often you do the calculations. So for each of the 4 worker categories of time, unmeasured, salaried, and output, they all have different calculations. So I think a first starting point is really understand your worker category. So then you know what the requirements are for the calculation. They can vary significantly. You can have a very similar contract with very similar contracted hours, contracted pay, working conditions. If you're unmeasured, you can be fine on a certain element with the same information, but if you flip it so you're actually salaried worker, you might actually be underpaid when you're being paid the same amount. So it is paramount importance to actually get that category of worker status understanding correct. I think, Justine, you've worked with a number of different people around this, and you can see where this categorization can really leave you quite vulnerable. And I think if we look at April 20, when the regulations changed slightly, so a lot more people are now falling into this salaried category as opposed to that unmeasured pot that you might have heard previously. But that again is bringing an awful lot of risks, unknown risks and technical risks for employers to navigate. So if we look at it for salaried workers, you're looking at contracted hours, contracted pay, but you also need to do an excess hours calculation. And it is again what it says on the tin. How many hours have all your salaried workers performed above the contracted hours? Do you have records of that? Would you be able to demonstrate it? Do you even monitor it?
If you, I mean, one of the difficulties that a lot of my clients had when I was in practice was, how do you decide which of the 4 categories the workers fall into? Most of the time it's fairly obvious, isn't it? But there's always these kind of grey areas. So do you have to just plunge into the cold water and decide which category your workers fall into, or is there somewhere neutral that you can go to ask somebody who might point you in the right direction?
I mean, yeah, there's a few NMW specialists out there that will look at it, not just at the contract. They'll delve underneath a little bit more, scratch the surface to see what's going on. The Gov site does have guidance, but you may indeed find yourself looking at different pages, flicking back and to try and find the right answer. The NMW regulations of 20 have made it quite clear in certain elements. I think for salaried, most people will look at the contracts, consider them to be salaried. The one thing that springs to mind that will throw you out of that automatically is if you're receiving regular commission. That will put you back in that unmeasured pot. So there's certain red flags straight away that can put you in there. But I understand it can be a minefield. Have a look at it yourself. HMRC are there if you want to try and ask them to ascertain it for you. However, even during an investigation, we're finding HMRC are repeating their guidance manual back to employers saying, this is what we expect you to look at. You need to define what type of worker they are. So,
and in terms of like actually doing the calculations, how because you've said about reviewing people's time worked and being able to prove it and everything. So how often do you actually have to carry out NMW calculations, and how long, once you've done them, how long do you need to keep them for, and things like that?
So again, we'll go back to what type of worker it is. Depends how frequently you need to do them. So if we take the common salaried worker, you would need to do them every month to make sure you've got contracted hours, contracted pay, and any relevant deductions. But then you also need to do an annual calculation for.
Jenny's frozen for a second there. Just see if we can get her back. Here she's back again. Hopefully that will work. I don't know if you can hear me, Jenny, but I can see a box with your name in it, but I can't see you or hear you.
Very
Hi,
sorry
Florian.
to interrupt. We are just trying to get Jenny back. She's clearly had some momentary issues, but we're trying to get her back on screen in a few seconds.
Thank you. That was a shame because she was in full flow as well, wasn't she? Here she is again. Oh no, she should be coming back again shortly, hopefully. Bear with me, people. I think it's important to know how to go about doing these calculations and how often you need to do them, because there's actually an awful lot more work in this than people think. If you've got to review these calculations at every pay interval, that's almost, well, it probably is another full-time job, isn't it, that needs to be done. And keeping the records to be able to demonstrate that you've done it as well. is quite an important issue. So I'll just hang on for a few minutes and see what happens. And please do feel free to put some questions in the chat if you want to, and leave me some Q&As for the end of the webinar as well. And when you come to do your poll at the end, please do not include the fact that Jenny disappeared halfway through the webinar, because that's not my fault. We'll see if we can get her back in a minute. I'd be interested to know, actually, while we're just sitting here, if anybody wants to put anything in the chat and talk to me, whether you have had any of your clients have an NMW inspection, and also, have any of your clients been named and shamed? That would be interesting to know. So let me know what your thoughts are on that. Stick something in the chat if you're still watching this webinar. Hopefully you are. It looks as if we have a poll there as well now. So we've got have you had an NMW inspection? And it looks as if I'm getting some responses in there. I've had 29 responses there. 3 people have had an NMW inspection and 33 people have not, out of the 36 responses that we've had. So that's interesting. It looks as if this geographical approach that people are doing to see about NMW inspections, where they're writing to the employer, but they're also writing to the employees, is being extended to Glasgow. So I don't know if people, well, first of all, if the NMW officers are successful in their endeavours in Glasgow, then they will also be expanding that to other areas of Scotland as well. So if people have had an NMW inspection, we've now had 41 responses in, and 90% of people have not had an NMW inspection. So no doubt you've got that lovely delight to look forward to yet. But it's an interesting statistic because they are moving around the country. There's no doubt about that. One of our attendees has had a health check visit. So that's good. It would be interesting to find out how that turns out for you, if it's already finished. If you feel as if you want to share that with us, that would be really good. And the other thing I wanted to ask people is, have you actually been, has anybody been, had any clients who've been named and shamed? When I was in practice, I had quite a few clients who'd been named and shamed, and reputationally, they did actually suffer quite badly. And one of them was a particularly large client who lost a lot of its own clients because of it, because it went into the press, and the press had a bit of a field day with it, and it was all over a salary sacrifice arrangement where people were being effectively underpaid by less than half a penny. So it was a very sad state of affairs, really. They had to come back from that.
Hi, Justine. It's David Mingus here. Hi there. I thought I would just jump on and join you here because it's a difficult position to be in, obviously, in this webinar. So one of the things that I'd possibly just wanted to highlight is we've got a question in the Q&A, which although it was saying not for the speakers, but I think actually it's a really interesting question to ask you. And it comes back to this calculation period. And the question is, if the pay reference period is weekly and employees get paid on a Friday, and they are paid 1 week in arrears, does the new pay reference period start on the Saturday for payrolls where employees work 7 days and for payrolls where employees work just Monday to Friday? Or what's the situation with that? I don't know if there's really too much information there for you to get, or whether you got the gist of it.
No, I could. I can understand the question and I can understand what they're actually after. But rather than trying to answer that myself, which I would do, I've just spotted that Jenny's reappeared in the corner.
Perfect timing, eh? Perfect timing.
We might Jenny, just get her to answer it instead. How about that?
Jenny, why don't you come back in?
I'm sorry about that, IT issues and all this. Okay, I don't know what the question is, but what do you want me to answer?
There's a question that's appeared in the chat box, Jenny. I think somebody's put it in there. Where is it? It's it's just because I was chit-chatting away while you were offline there. So a question had come through before saying, if the pay reference period is weekly and employers get paid on a Friday 1 week in arrears, does the new pay reference period start on the Saturday for payrolls where employees work 7 days and for payrolls where employees work just Monday to Friday?
Okay. And there is no requirement for them to do the weekend work. So it would start from the Saturday, but there will be no working time for the Saturday and Sunday to be included in their calculations. So for NMW purposes, it's what's actually been worked and considered working time. So there will be none for that period. So it'd only be the working time from Monday onwards that will be included.
Yeah. Okay. Now we did a couple of polls while you were missing, Jenny.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we thought we'd have a bit of fun with the polls. So we did one on have you had an NMW inspection? And we got a result showing that there was about 90% of people hadn't had one. They've yet to experience the delights of that. And the other one was about have you been named and shamed? And I don't know whether we've got a response for that or not yet, have we? Did we do one? I don't know, but we'll have a look at that in a minute because I can't see that back up on the screen. So we'll sort that poll out later. So anyway, Jenny, would you like to carry on?
I can't remember what we're talking about apart from being minimum wage. Okay, so it's the rate and the calculations is what we were drumming home, and making sure the foundation of the worker category fits to the calculation. So the calculations can totally vary. Like you said, you've got some people that are weekly paid. So if they're weekly paid and they're weekly salaried, then you'd have to do a calculation each week and then annually as well. Now, to add a little bit of complexity, because NMW don't like to make life easy, do they? If you are salaried and you've got salaried worker status and they're doing salaried work, for the annual calculation, it's different for every single one of your employees at the moment. And it's based on the date they actually started with the business. So poor payroll could be doing 365 different calculations for every employee. But HMRC recognised this in February 20, and they are allowing businesses to align all their salaried workers onto the same calculation year, which is great. The administrative burden is taken away at that. It also allows you to automate it and do the calculations differently. There's a little probably a 3-month step that you need to follow to align onto your calculation year. And you can choose as an employer which calculation year is right for you and your workers. So if you're looking down that route, maybe ask around a little bit if you need a little bit of advice as to what will be the best time of year for you to do it. Might be you align it to your own financial year. Your payroll might say, don't you dare do it then if I've got to do a load of extra calculations. You might want to align it to when bonuses are paid. There's different areas that you can look at with it. But yet one size does not fit all with this calculation.
I don't think anybody really realises just how much work goes on in the background to do with NMW, because there's, all businesses employ different types of employees, mostly speaking, and the amount of additional work that goes on in the background just to comply with NMW, it's not just about doing payroll anymore, is it?
It isn't just looking that rate up. It's making sure your policies, when you change policies and look at different things, working from home, all these different new progressions that are happening to employers, they all have a direct implication on NMW compliance. When everyone's sat in the office, you know what hours people are generally working. But now if you've got people working from home and they're logging in at all different times, you've got flexible working. How is an employer keeping track of what hours is going on? How are they looking at certain things? These are all what HMRC are well aware of and testing at the moment. So every time a new policy comes in, look at it a little bit critically through that NMW lens to see if A, it complies, and B, if it can cause any risks with your calculations. I often feel very sorry for payroll because everyone looks at them that, well, you must be governing our NMW compliance and doing our calculations. But who in a business has overall the governing role for NMW compliance? Often you don't even find that out till the HMRC investigation letter lands. From there, it's like a hot potato. So it goes from payroll to HR to reward to employment taxes. And it seems to land with employment taxes in a lot of cases because you have the relationship with HMRC. So it's getting all those threads together, understanding each other's needs and requirements of NMW compliance and feeding it into payroll. Payroll don't know what hours have been worked if no one tells them.
Well, so would you say, for example, if you've got a sort of array of clients, and let's say you've got your own practice as an accountant, and you've got an array of clients, and you offer an outsourced payroll bureau service, would you say that it's really important within the engagement letter process to actually get that sort of sorted out from the outset? So if you're doing payroll, you've got to set out what your service level agreement is going to be to provide that payroll service. But you've got to go one step further, haven't you? Because you need to work out who's taking responsibility for, constantly assessing and updating the national minimum wage checks and requirements that need to be done.
You're perfectly right, Justin. So often in the outsourcing, they'll say they do NMW checks. Prod a little bit more. What are the checks? Often they are just the age-related checks. We check the date of births, right? We check different things like that. If the contracted hours change, that's it. But that is as far as they go. If you actually say, well, are they unmeasured? Are they timed? They're going to need that information from you to know which calculation to do. If you don't feed through information about the actual working hours, they're not going to be able to perform the detailed NMW calculations that are required. So often that lands back within your own business to run through. And if you've got a weekly payroll, you'd be doing them each week to make sure no one's breached.
Yeah, and the last thing you want is for HMRC's NMW people to pitch up outside and you're all arguing between yourselves as to who's actually been responsible for carrying out these checks.
Yeah, And it often is that hot potato. It's just passed around till it lands with someone, unfortunately. I think on the next slide I've got, is probably a little scary, this slide, but in the next slide we've actually got what difference can 5 minutes time make to someone who's paid at or very close to national minimum wage, national living wage. So this is a sample of, I don't know, a contact centre, shall we say, that's come in 5 minutes early and leaves 5 minutes late because you can't get the client off the phone quick enough at 5 o'clock. And if you can look at these figures, how quickly they can ramp up for NMW calculations, you can find that, okay, this is for a workforce of 5,000 that are doing 5 minutes early and 5 minutes late. HMRC can often get this data. So they're looking at certain data with an HMRC. So in an investigation, they will say, I want all your computer data you've got that shows when people logged in, when people logged out. Sometimes it shows they've worked through their lunch breaks and their unpaid breaks, and that all becomes additional working time as well. And from there, they can mine down the information you want and come up with quite scary calculations. So, as I said, they go back over a 6-year period. So where you're looking at 1 year and then you extrapolate it to a population. And then you've got the penalty, which at the moment is standing at 200% of whatever arrears are found. So it can get to eye-watering figures very quickly.
So do we, is the next slide got a calculation on it, Jenny? Because we're still on the, well, as far as I can see, we're still on the, it's not just a rate, it's how you calculate slide. Have you moved on since then?
According to my screen, I have, but as you know, we're having a few little IT glitches here at the moment. I don't know if the audience can see that. Someone else has taken over.
I can now see it, so hopefully the audience can too. So what you've got there then is essentially what the calculation is of the consequences of someone working an extra 10 minutes a day, which is, you know, easy done, very, very easily done. And then the calculation of the arrears, and then this terrible penalty that comes on top.
Yeah. And I mean, okay, there is a nice side to the penalty in a way, a nice side, the better side, I should say. If you pay all the arrears and the penalty within 14 days, the penalty is halved. There's an administrative
so it's a bit like a parking fine then.
Yes, indeed. What you actually get, I mean, it's still eye-watering, but if you can save that amount of money, you will try your hardest to actually get it over the line in 14 days. But those arrears payments are obviously to current workers, which are the easy ones to get through. You've got former employees as well. So you've got to locate them. Have you still got their bank details? How are you going to get it out to them? So there's a whole process behind that you need to be thinking of as well, to make sure the arrears are paid correctly to each individual former worker as well.
And what is it HMRC's policy? I mean, I know you've put on this slide, for example, you've got they employ 5,000 people. So HMRC have just gone, right, 5,000 times blah, blah, blah. So is that their approach constantly? Do they always do that? Just extrapolate?
Okay, if an employer cannot prove the hours worked, so it goes back to how you can evidence the hours that individuals are working, HMRC will look for their own evidence elsewhere, talk to current and former employees. They will also ask for this data that they're looking at the moment. So the logging in, logging out data. Often, you know, you and I could be at home logging in an evening. We could actually stop and go and have a cup of coffee and leave the laptop on. We've got no idea of knowing what hours are actually being worked. So HMRC can only take the evidence that's presented to them. Another area they'll look at with evidence that I'm seeing at the moment is a lot of businesses do training and they have online training.
Yes.
And with the online training, there's obviously a back office that you can have a look at. So there's lots of data behind there. If you're anything like me, you might be doing these training courses and you get to the test and you have to do it 2 or 3 times because you might not get it right. All of that is working time. So everyone might flex slightly differently. The stamp, the data stamp will be there on your L&D platform that shows how long someone undertook the work for. And HMRC are at the moment looking at this and also say, oh, it appears they did that at 7 o'clock at night. That was out of shift. Have they been paid for it? Let's include that working time. So they will extrapolate it if an employer doesn't have the exact information to rebuff it.
So it's data from the data that HMRC are using then, is that for their investigations? It's basically IT data, when people have switched on, when they've switched off, that kind of thing. Is there anything else that they use as well?
They use all sorts of data. I mean, I've known in the time they've used CCTV within certain offices to see when people are actually coming in and out. They have the powers to request an awful lot of data. Swipe passes, anything which leaves a timestamp for them, they can use as data. They'll obviously use the interview notes from when they're talking to current and former workers. They often try and, if the questions aren't put to them in an easy to understand manner, a lot of employees tend to go, oh yes, I come in early, oh yes, I'm a good employee, I do this. But actually, in the way they answer the questions, they can actually be burying the employer, unfortunately. So it's making sure, if they actually do go to chat to them, make sure it is genuine, they're upfront. It's not them that's been put on the line, it's just an HMRC testing what the hours of work is. Each different sector has different risks to do with time. So if you've got a sector where they're in manufacturing and they've got to put overalls on and they've got to put certain PPE on, even that time is taken as working time. HMRC refer to it as robing and derobing time, which is quite a grand way to say how long does it take you to put your clothes on and take them off. But all of those minutes do add up.
Yeah, they do, and actually it's a bit different to sort of other legislation, isn't it? Because, for example, you know, in a lot of tax legislation, you don't count the thing that puts you in the position to do your job. You actually kind of leave that out. But for NMW purposes, it's basically the minute your toe touches the inside of the front door of the building, if you're working in a building, and if you're working at home, when you switch your computer on, or even when you switch your office light on and walk in and start to switch everything on. So it's a different way of looking at things, isn't it?
It is. It's understanding it. You might come in, you might turn the alarm off, and then you might sit and have a cup of coffee for a bit. So they start, stop, start. It's understanding it, understanding your workforce. Most managers know who their workhorses are in the business, the ones who are putting the extra hours in. And it's that information and conversation that I think needs to be had between employers and employees, rather than just going, oh, you paid okay. Just double check that the calculations are correct from there.
Yeah, okay. So if you only had 3 words of wisdom for employers to follow, what would they be?
Oh, 3 words. Okay. Category. So worker category. Know it, follow it. It will make your life a lot easier. Time. Understanding actual working time. Test it, sample it, put it into the calculations. And the last one, I think the risk for it is salary sacrifice. Okay, that's 2 words, not 1 word, sorry. So under salary sacrifice, we're seeing a lot of risks develop, because with salary sacrifice reduction, it obviously reduces the pay for NMW purposes. And if you've got a number of different salary sacrifices here, there and everywhere, and each one is checked at the start when they enroll for it, it doesn't mean to say each month they're still NMW compliant. So make sure you do, add all the salary sacrifices together to include in your calculations. Okay, so I can see myself now, but Justine seems to have frozen. David, are you coming on to talk to me now?
I'll try and unmute myself now. Yeah, so Jenny, I'll come on and talk to you while Justine seems to have a bit of a frozen moment there. I don't know whether you want to go on to the next slide, or whether we want to take some of the Q&A. What's best for you?
the other thing that I think Justine wanted to carry on just briefly on was what's on the horizon. So what can we see coming over the NMW mountain in the future? So we've obviously got the increase in April, which is a significant increase. So that they're compressing the rates so that there's less NMW and national living wage rates. They're also lowering the national living wage rate. So it's now going from 23-year-olds to 21. So businesses are obviously seeing a really significant impact here. Another one that seemed to have snuck on the radar a little bit was last year there was a consultation from HMRC about what data they can gather. And one of the outcomes of that consultation is from April 25, so okay, next year, if you have variable pay, if an employee has variable pay, the actual working hours, which is all that we've been discussing here, need to go on to your RTI system. So there is a requirement to actually complete that there. At the moment, there's bandings up to 16 hours, 10 hours, whatever, but now it is the actual hours. Now, to me, as an NMW geek here, that just sets alarm bells. It's going to be so easy for HMRC to see in real time any possible breaches for them to do there.
Can I ask Jenny, just a point of clarification on that? So is that rounded hours or is that exact time?
They're going to need time. So they're going to know what actual working time is being completed. So yeah, it will be very easy for NMW, holiday pay, anything else like that. It's the start of it. And this consultation originally said for all workers, so not just variable pay, but they did come back, the government did come back and say, you know, for the moment, we're not going to do salaried workers. And it's that for the moment. Yep. So maybe further down the line, that is one route they will be looking at, because you do, as an employer, unfortunately, need to be able to demonstrate the hours worked on this particular one.
And you mentioned earlier on there, Jenny, just the increase in the wage rates from April. I mean, what's your feeling? How are businesses coping, reacting with that? I mean, obviously there's massive cost of living pressures and supply chain issues within businesses generally. What's the feedback, I guess, from clients that you're working with around that wage increase?
It is challenging. It's a really big challenge for them at the moment to actually, it's not just paying at the living wage rate, it's all the next steps up. So you're looking at the managers, you've got to look at the whole of the workforce, and it has a direct implication on them. So yeah, absolutely challenging. I think they're just looking over the horizon at, are they actually going to compress this a little bit more? So are they going to bring the age rate down again and just have like an apprenticeship rate and a working rate? We don't know what direction it's going in, but we do know it's on the up. So it is challenging. It's how can we address this and work together effectively so that we meet the NMW requirements, but also you're not overstretching and looking at redundancies for staff and going down that route, David.
Yep, absolutely. So I think Justine has been able to rejoin us. I can see her off screen at the moment in any case. So I'm not sure if we can bring her on screen or whether she's there. Don't have a camera. Justine, are you there? No.
Maybe not. Anyway, David, I'll just do one little extra one for you before we close. So what else is on the horizon? NMW Amendment 2024. Yes, there's been an amendment already. So for this instrument removes paragraph 57.3 from the 2015 regulations. So if you remember rightly, anyone that's a geek, any worker that is residing in the employer's home and being treated as a member of the family was historically not entitled to NMW pay because that was not considered working time. That has been removed now. Therefore, well, I say now from the 1st of April. So in future, that time will be considered working time. So if you've got any employers that have got a worker, I don't know, an au pair, cleaner, anything like that, housekeeper, it will now consider working time from the 1st of April. And those were the three things I had that were on the horizon.
Fantastic. That's a really good roundup, Jenny. There's a few questions that come in. I'm conscious of time, and I know we've had a few technical difficulties, but I'm quite sure that those who are attending and on the webinar have plans for 12 o'clock. So I'm keen just to keep us on time here. So I'm going to move on to some of the Q&As that have come in. And I think the first one is a really interesting one. Obviously, 2024 is a leap year. And the question quite simply is, how does the extra day this month impact the national minimum wage position?
Okay, I think we'll start off. How many weeks are there in a year? That's the NMW question everyone wants to know. So most of us will say 52. However, for NMW purposes, if you're doing your payroll, you should be looking at something like 52.18, which will count in the leap year. So it takes into account those particular figures. And I think a few businesses previously have been caught out on the naming and shaming list by using 52 weeks, not 52.18.
And that perhaps answers one of the other questions which was there, which, although it's slightly different figures that are used, but it says when calculating the annual salary for weekly employees, do you use 52 or 52.143 to find the annual salary?
Indeed. And again, it depends if people are working weekends, if they're not working, what the shift patterns are. It is a minefield to actually look at it. HMRC's guidance and instructions themselves vary from 52.14 to 52.18. There's all sorts of figures.
Yeah, that's fine. Justine, great to see you back. And hopefully if you just come off mute, we can speak to you now as well. Great to have you back and great to see you again. Glad we've got around some of the technical glitches. Do you want to carry on with Jenny?
Can do, yes. I could hear you because I've been back on the call for a while, but I think it took time to get me back in to the room, kind of thing. So
I'll leave you two guys to it then, because you know far more about this than I do. I'll leave you to it.
So I've got I'll just get the Q&A box up. So I heard the one about the leap year, so that was a good one. So we've got another one here from Steve Billingham. So he's saying, what about net deductions that are retained by an employer? Should they be also treated the same as a salary sacrifice and included in NMW calculations?
Need a bit more digging into that one, I'm afraid. So if we take pension as a deduction, if you do it salary sacrifice, it counts towards NMW because salary sacrifice is the overarching umbrella there. Yeah. If it's a net deduction from pension, not under salary sacrifice, it won't be included in NMW calculations. So there's a lot more around that. Again, a net deduction, what is it for? Is it for the employer's own use and benefit, which is another NMW red flag? But we don't have time to actually go into that now. But I think maybe Steve was looking around the pension side of it, that hopefully we've answered.
Yeah, and Steve, if you've got any other questions, just send me an email, jrecommon@icas.com, and I'll pass it on. We'll see if we can get you a reply. So I've got another one here from an anonymous person. If someone clocks in 30 minutes before the contracted start time and goes to the canteen for a coffee and then starts work at the contracted time, is the 30 minutes in work but not working included for NMW calculations?
It should not be included because they're not working. If, however, they're having a cup of coffee and then they're turning the lights on and they're turning the computer on, doing that, that would be considered working. If you are categorically sure that they are sat there having their cup of coffee, reading the newspaper, just have a conversation with them saying why you come in. Maybe it's because the bus arrives early, and make a note of that. So if HMRC pick it up further down the line, you say, yeah, I've recognised it, but it's not working time.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do one more question at the moment, but what we'll do, guys, is we'll put all the questions onto a spreadsheet and we'll get the answers for you and we'll pop them up so as everybody can see what the question and the answers were. So they'll be available after the webinar, possibly tomorrow or maybe Monday or something. Okay, so the last question is, We have employees who work 4 on, 4 off shifts for a set weekly payment per week. Our weeks run Sunday to Saturday. So the weeks where they work 3 shifts a week, they're over NMW. But when it falls on a 4-shift week, they technically fall under NMW. Is this a problem, or does it average out? Because it averages out as above, is that okay?
You need to look at each pay reference period. So what the pay reference period, it can't be longer than 31 days. So some people who have 445 on the 5 months, they can have an issue with that 31. And if in each individual pay reference period, they are paid above NMW, you're okay. If in one of them they are not, then yes, there is possibly a risk there. There might be ways to look at this contractually where you can address it, but obviously we've not got time to go into all the contracts, but just look at each pay reference period. And if there are some that are falling below, yeah, you might have a risk there.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay. Okay, so we're almost out of time. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do a 3-question poll, which should appear on your screens now, hopefully. I live in hope. I'm an optimist. It would be great if you could leave us a rating for the webinar today. It's going to appear in the chat box at the top of your screen, so please complete that. In terms of what's coming up, the links to sign up to all ICAS's events are available at icas.com/events. And please look out for the registrations buttons to be made live on those webinars so that you can register for them. And I want to do a particular plug for the 2 spring tax updates, as you might expect. So please come and watch those. So it only leaves me right now to thank Jenny once again, and of course you, the audience, for joining our webinar today and sticking with us. I think most people have. I hope that the webinar has been helpful to you, and thank you for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.